Hello and welcome to the Percussive Art Society's Summer 2023 Friday Fundamentals Series. My name is Christopher Wilson. I'm a member of the PAS Education Committee and the chair of the Fundamentals Subcommittee. It's my pleasure to introduce today's clinician, Denton Sutherlin. Denton is currently pursuing a master's degree from the University of North Texas and has a bachelor's degree in music education from Indiana University, as well as experience as a public school teacher. Today, he'll be presenting a clinic titled 24 Simple Fixes to Make Your Percussion Section Better. On behalf of PAS and the Education Committee, I hope you enjoy today's presentation.
Hi, my name is Denton Sutherlin, and I'm a member of the PAS Education Committee. Today I'm going to be presenting on a topic that I have presented before on. I did this as a session at the Indiana Music Education Association conference. This is 40 simple fixes to make your percussion section better. We only have time to go through one section of this, but we'll get to that in just a second. So here's just a little bit about me. I always think it's important to know a little bit about your teacher before you start learning from them. I have a bachelor's degree in music education from Indiana University. I taught for 3 years as a percussion director at Concord Community Schools in Elkhart, Indiana. Currently, I'm a teaching assistant at the University of North Texas. And when I'm not doing music things, I usually like to be in the outdoors, hiking, climbing mountains, camping. So my presentation is divided up into 3 different sections. Better look, better sound, classroom management and organization, and saving money and repair. We're only going to look at better look, better sound right now, just for time's sake. My goal with this is for these to be really simple and easy things that you can implement in your classroom right away. These are meant for all grade levels, and this presentation is really directed to band directors who do not have help with a percussion director. So hopefully these are all going to be little bitty tips that you can give your percussionist just in the middle of band class. And really my main goal is just for you to walk away with one nugget of knowledge. And if you walk away with one thing that you can implement in your classroom, then I think that this was successful. So let's go ahead and dig into these. Number 1 of better look, better sound is a black towel. This is actually the reason I made this presentation, is because I would go to the Indiana state finals for concert band and I would see percussionists putting sticks and mallets on stands without black towels, and I thought it was so distracting. So make sure you have your black towels in your band room, and make sure your percussionists are putting them on music stands if they need to switch mallets, put an instrument down, put a triangle on a stand, whatever it might be. Make sure you have black towels. You can also use them to dampen your bass drum, to prop up different metal instruments, to put on a drum to make it quieter. They're really versatile and they're really important to have. Number 2, a snare drum rug. If you play in a really live auditorium, or you play in a gym, or if you're a middle school band director and you like to have multiple people playing the snare drum, you might want to think about putting a rug under your snare drum for a concert. That way it helps control the sound a little bit. We all know that the snare drums can get a little bit loud in our band, and this is just one way that I've found helps balance out the percussion section. Number 3 is muffling. This is a really simple thing that I don't see on a lot of drums. But most drums need some kind of muffling to help control the resonance and to get the exact resonance that you want out of the drum. Muffling can be really easy to make too. My muffling that I use on my professional snare drum is just a piece of fabric I got from Joann's Fabric, and then I just take little binder clips and clip it onto the rim. So it does not have to be fancy. You can use a fabric like this, you can use leather, but it's really important to think about how much you want your drums resonating and to put some kind of muffling on your drums, such as your snare drums, your toms, your bass drum, etc. On to number 4, tuning. Don't be afraid to tune. I find that a lot of band directors are kind of worried they're going to mess something up if they try tuning their drum. you're probably not going to mess anything up. As long as you keep everything at the same tension around the drum and you move in small increments around the drum, you're not going to mess anything up. In general, I always like the bottom head to be a little bit tighter than the top head in general. The bottom head is the resonating head, the top head is the batter head. So the bottom head, if it's a little bit tighter, that's going to be the one that resonates. But most of all, don't be afraid to try something while you're tuning. Now, drum heads. Make sure you take care of your drum heads, and you're teaching your students to take care of your drum heads. If a drum head has a dent, a scrape, a hole, it needs to be replaced. But a quality drum head can last longer than you might think if it's taken care of and played properly. A good quality drum head can also make a bad drum sound pretty good. Whenever I recommend a head to people, I always just recommend a Remo-coated Ambassador, just as a kind of general head. That'll get you through pretty much whatever you want on a snare drum or on a tom. It'd be a nice, good sound, and it's a nice, simple, all-around head. Now, when it comes to snares, you can replace the snares on your snare drum and make it sound so much better. If your snare drum has the coils that look kind of like a spring, I would totally recommend doing this, and this would make your drum sound just night and day difference. Companies like Grover and Black Swamp make these replacement snares, and it's real simple to just take them off and put these new ones on. And they can really make a cheaper drum sound like a professional drum. Now, for number 7, sticking with the snares, I always have my students write snares off at the bottom of their music if they're playing the snare drum. Because not every piece you are going to play is going to have the snare drum, and it's not fun when you're playing your slow lyrical piece and the snares are buzzing in the back of the ensemble. So I always have my students write snares off at the bottom of the page, and when the next person goes to play the snare drum, I have them write snares on at the top of the page. That way they don't start the piece without the snares on. Instrument covers is kind of a big deal. I walk into a lot of band rooms and the instrument covers are just thrown everywhere. There's no regard as to what they're for, and like whenever people take them off to play, they just kind of throw them on the ground. These do help keep dust off the instrument. And if you go and your timpani are not covered usually or not taken care of real well, if you wipe your hand across the head, I think you'll be surprised at how much dust there is actually on that head. So what I do is I teach my students how to fold the covers up and place them underneath the instrument. That way it looks nice and the covers are staying nice and clean. Now, moving timpani. Moving timpani is something else that sometimes people are a little bit afraid of or not 100% sure how to do. Make sure you're always moving your timpani by the struts and not the rim. And another little tip is if you have the pedal up all the way, that way the drum is at its tightest tension, the rim is going to have less chance of moving. So whenever I teach my students how to move the timpani, I don't just teach them how to move by the struts, but I also tell them to put the pedal all the way up. That way the rim and head have less chance of moving. When I'm storing my timpani, I teach my students to store the pedal in the middle of the range. That way there's some tension on the head. That way if it gets bumped by something, it's not likely to move, but there's some tension off the head. That way we're not stretching the head out too much. Now the timpani pedals and tuning. Just like tuning with other drums, don't be afraid to mess around with your timpani tuning. If your timpani pedals are not staying in the correct place, usually they'll flop back like this, chances are the tension on the drum head is not right. Chances are you need more tension on the drum head. So one thing that I like to do is I like to put my pedal all the way up and then tune the timpani to its highest pitch, and then I know that the drum is going to be in about the range that it needs to be. You can see here that I've got all the ranges listed, and this is really easy to find on Google too. Just Google timpani ranges and you'll find what you need. So when it comes to stands, setting up and the angle of this stand, this is really important both from a looks perspective and from a student's playing and technique perspective. Stand height and angle can really change the sound of the drum and the student playing it. So obviously different students are going to need stands at different heights because all our students are different heights. Make sure that you are providing students the time, the space, and the knowledge to raise and lower their stands, whether that be in a rehearsal or in a concert, because it's going to happen. You're going to have a shorter person or a taller person playing the snare drum in the same concert, and it's going to have to be adjusted. So make sure that you account for that and that you let that happen because it is important. I also like to make sure all my drums are kind of at the same angle. A lot of times I'll see toms that are all at different angles, and make sure that they're all at the same angle. Even if that's flat or slightly tilted towards the student, those angles affects the way that the stick reacts with the head. So if they're not all the same, you're not going to get the same sound out of the drum. Now, posture is something that percussionists need to think about too. I feel like as in the band room, there's a lot of talk about how you sit in the chair and how you sit up straight and how you approach your instrument as a wind player, but maybe not as much as a percussionist. A lot of times percussionists slouch a little bit, or they cross their legs while they're playing, or they're just standing with their weight on one leg. But posture is really important for getting a good sound out of our instruments too. So challenge your students to stand up straight, their feet shoulder width apart, no leaning on the instruments, and no crossing their legs. Dynamics. This is something really interesting that you can think about if you are teaching younger students. Unlike wind players, percussionists can be asked to play dynamics on day one of playing percussion. It's not that difficult to play louder or softer on our instruments. So if you are teaching in a middle school situation and you need to give your percussionist something to be challenged on or something to think about, maybe this is something simple that you can have them think about, and you can keep moving on with your winds and keep class going. The way that percussionists change their dynamics is through stick height, mallet hardness, playing zone. They don't necessarily need to even know all of that. You can tell one of them to play softer and they'll probably figure it out, right? So percussionists can play softer or louder on day one. Articulation. Percussionists can articulate. There is note length to our instruments, and specifically things like crash cymbals, bass drums, mallet instruments, and timpani, they all have some sort of sustain to them. So we can use muting to control the resonance. If you strike the bass drum and you're letting it ring and then you use your hand to mute it, if you strike the timpani, you can let it ring and use your hand to mute it. Even like a vibraphone, you can strike the vibraphone and use the dampener pedal to mute it. All of these are ways that percussionists can use articulation to enhance the music. So when you're listening to the way that your wind players play and the way that the percussionists are reacting to that, you can use words like shorter or longer for your percussionist and their instruments. Something else that you might think about with articulation is the beater choice can kind of create different articulations. A softer mallet can create a longer tone, or a harder mallet can create the perception of a shorter sound. Now, stroke type is a really important technical thing to understand about percussion, because this is the way that anything as far as accents, flams, drags, and dynamic change is concerned. You have to know your stroke types. So a full stroke is when the beater or the tip of the stick starts up and ends up. A downstroke is when it starts up, ends down. A tap is when it starts down, ends down. And an upstroke is when it starts down and ends up. In order for a percussionist to play an accent pattern, if I'm just going to play accents on the beats 1 and 3 of eighth notes in a 4/4 bar, I'm going to go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. I had to know how to do a downstroke and tap strokes in order to do that. So anytime a percussionist sees accents in their music, they're going to have to understand how to use different stroke types. And this needs to be taught and needs to be understood by the teacher, because this isn't super intuitive at first. I have found when I'm teaching this, I have to explain that, oh, you have to keep the stick down or the mallet down when you're playing the accent, because if you let it come back up, then you can't play the softer note after that. So make sure you know your stroke types and you familiarize yourself with what they are. Playing zones is another way that you can get a lot of different sounds out of your instruments. You can use dynamics or timbres or just so many different colors that you can get just by playing on a different spot of the instrument. Now this could be a little bit overwhelming too, but try to simplify it. If there's something that you don't like the sound of, just have your student try playing in a different place and see if that helps. In general, for mallet instruments, you're usually going to want to hit towards the center of the bar to get the best sound. You want to usually avoid playing over the string of the bar called the nodal point. That's going to be the less resonant sound on the bar. For drums, just off of the center is going to be your louder sound. If you hit a drum right in the center, it gets kind of a dead poppy sound, so I would avoid that. About halfway to the edge of the drum is going to be like your medium sound, and you can have your students play all the way at the edge of the drum for their softer sounds. For a triangle, you will want students to strike towards the closed end of the triangle, or right on the bottom here, or even sometimes on the side. Make sure they're not striking too close to the open end of the triangle. With tambourine, the closer you strike to the edge, usually the more articulate sound you're going to get. You can also use your fist to hit in the center for a really loud sound. In timpani, this differs on each drum a little bit, but a few inches from the edge is going to get you the best, most resonant sound. If I were you, I would go and mess around with your timpani and just see how far from the edge you get the most resonant sound out of your drums. Mallets and beaters. I see a lot of times that schools have just like one set of timpani mallets or one bass drum mallet. If you can try to have a set of 3 mallets for every instrument, I think that this creates an endless amount of possibilities for creating different colors, textures, and dynamics. And it doesn't have to be crazy. I usually stuck with 3 different mallets while I was teaching. I had a soft pair, a medium pair, and a hard pair. And it was easy for me to just say, let's try the hard pair of mallets there. And just having those 3 simple options for most of my instruments, timpani, bass drum, triangle, marimba, xylo, glock, etc. Having just 3 options can really widen the spectrum of the sounds that your percussionists can make. Now let's talk basic grip problems. There are some really basic grip problems that I see all the time with young students. The first one is pressing the stick into the hand. So if I am holding the stick like this, a lot of times I'll see students press the stick into their hand and their fingers will not be curved around the stick. Watch out for this. And whenever I said don't press the stick into your hand, students usually knew what I was talking about. Make sure they're wrapping the fingers around the stick and not pressing. Droopy thumbs is another thing I would see. I would see the thumb not even a part of the fulcrum. They would droop their thumb down and almost have kind of like a caveman grip. So watch out for those droopy thumbs. Make sure that thumb is staying right up on the stick. And then flying fingers. a lot of times students will not want to use the back 3 fingers while they're playing things, especially like buzz rolls or any kind of rolls that they're learning. I always taught my students to keep those fingers close to the stick because they're going to need them when they get done playing a buzz roll or something like that. So watch out for flying fingers, droopy thumbs, and pressing on the stick. All right, let's talk about quality accessory instruments. These are really simple and, in the grand scheme of things, pretty cheap ways to make your percussionist sound so much better. Really, honestly, sound professional. You can buy a professional tambourine for $215, a professional triangle for $100, and a professional woodblock for $50. You know, that hasn't even added up, that doesn't even come close to the price of any of the other instruments that there are. So in the grand scheme of things, it's pretty cheap to buy really great accessory instruments. And these great accessory instruments will make your percussion section sound so much better. I recommend Grover or Black Swamp. Those both make fantastic professional percussion instruments at about that price range. So good quality accessory instruments can make your section sound so much better. All right, the triangle clip. I'm sure we've all seen the shoelace around the triangle because nobody knows where the triangle clip is. So it's really important that you have a triangle clip. I always made sure I had a specific place this was stored. That way it never got lost. And my students always knew where to put the triangle and the triangle clip and the triangle beaters because those things are so easy to lose. But it's really important to have these. The triangle clip will actually, it really does make your triangle sound better. It opens up the sound. It provides the student with the proper playing technique. So make sure you've got your triangle clip. And sticking with the triangle, a lot of times I see students that don't know how to hold the triangle. And I've got a really simple method for teaching students to hold the triangle. All I do is I tell them to hold a glass of water with their left hand, raise their index finger, and then a lot of times I'll place the clip into their hand. And then from there, I just tell them to set their index finger on top, and that's how you hold the triangle. So it doesn't have to be super complicated. Again, that's hold a glass of water, raise the index finger. I usually set it in there for the first couple times. That way they can get used to where it rests on their hand. The index finger rests on top. Sleigh bells. So picking up and putting down the sleigh bells can be difficult without making sound. So there's a few different ways you can go about making your sleigh bells quieter. I've seen people that build boxes and then fill the box with some sort of foam that you just stick the sleigh bells into. I've seen people drill a hole through the handle of the sleigh bells, tie a string to it, and then you can hang it on a cymbal stand or something. That way it's just suspended and you just have to pick it up from the suspended spot. And then, as you can see in this picture, I've seen people who take off the bottom bell and put some sort of stand on it. That way it stands up straight. So basically, all these solutions get your sleigh bells from sitting horizontal to being up vertical, which is going to help your students not make so much sound when they pick them up. All right, Tambourine 101. So let's just talk about just a couple of the different angles for while you're playing tambourine, or your students are. If you want the driest articulate sound, you're going to want your students to keep the tambourine at a 45-degree angle while they're playing it. I tell my students just to make a little birdie with their hand, and that's how I have them make their hand shape. Make a little birdie with the fingers, 45-degree angle at the edge. That's going to get you your most dry, articulate sound. Now, when you want your tambourine to be the most wet, legato long, when you're doing rolls, it's going to be at a 90-degree angle. So if I'm doing a shake roll, I'm going to keep that tambourine at the 90-degree angle. All right, and then our final tip for better look, better sound is going to be crash cymbals. So there are so many different ways to teach the crash cymbals The crash cymbals can be kind of hard for younger students because they're so heavy and so awkward. They're not something normal, and it's not a normal feeling to play the crash cymbals. So I try to make this as normal feeling as possible. When I teach students to play the crash cymbals, I first start by teaching them just to do a relaxed clap. If they can play a relaxed clap or do a relaxed clap without forcing it and to have a nice follow through, then they're going to be able to transfer that over to the cymbals. And that's really the way I teach my crash cymbal technique. It's a relaxed clap. Now, some people do this swiping motion, and there are some people, even professionals, that do this really well. But I don't teach my students the swiping motion because I find that gets the air pocket more often than the relaxed clap motion. So also just a couple little things to think about with your cymbals. If the sound isn't quite what you want, you have to get the cymbals to flam just a little bit, which means one side's gonna hit before the other side. Contact on the cymbals is also okay. They don't have to come apart right away. They can be together a little bit and get a little bit of sound together before they're released. Make sure your students aren't pushing the cymbals together, because if they're pushing the cymbals together, they're most likely to get that air pocket sound. Also, I like to think about one cymbal moving into the other cymbal. So that's just a couple tips for your crash cymbals. I hope these 24 tips help you in the classroom. These are really meant to be easy. These are meant to be one-time things that you can say to your percussionist. If your percussionist needs something to think about, you can provide them with this information. And hopefully this is going to be helpful for you in the classroom. If you ever have any questions about any of these tips, please feel free to email me. My email is my name, dentonsutherlin@gmail.com. And I'm more than willing to help answer any questions you have. Hopefully, maybe one day you'll get to see the rest of my 40 tips. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you all have a great time teaching your bands.
Thank you for watching, and thank you, Denton, for your wonderful presentation. Be sure to join us next Friday, where we'll be welcoming in Carl Latham, who'll be presenting a drum set fundamental session titled Grooves You Can Use. If you're interested in joining PAS or learning how you can contribute to the best musical community on the planet, head over to pas.org today.